She wasn't supposed to be crying. Not here. Not in the hushed, velvet-draped dining room of Le Rave, a place whose name literally meant the dream. Her dream tonight had been simple. A single glass of expensive champagne and a quiet corner to disappear into. To feel, just for an hour, like she belonged. But dreams, like the delicate foam on her barely touched glass, have a way of dissolving, don't they? The chair opposite her was starkly, painfully empty, a reminder of a celebration for one that now felt like a punishment. And the waiter, with his razor-sharp smirk and eyes that had sized her up and dismissed her in a single glance, had made sure of it. Now, here she sits, trying to swallow the lump in her throat, praying no one notices the silent tears tracing a path down her cheeks. But here's a little secret. In less than 2 minutes, a man is going to walk through that door. A man who moves with the weight of the world on his shoulders. And when Steven Seagal steps into this room, the oppressive silence surrounding this one weeping girl is about to become the most powerful sound in the entire restaurant. The setup. Just hours ago, Maya had walked into the opulent restaurant with a quiet resolve. The city lights glittered outside, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with old money and the soft clinking of silver on porcelain. It was intimidating. She was here to mark a private anniversary, a bittersweet milestone she preferred to face alone. She'd chosen Le Rave specifically because it felt like a challenge, a place so far removed from her everyday life that she could pretend to be someone else, someone confident and unshaken. She ordered a single appetizer, the lobster bisque, and a glass of champagne, her voice barely a whisper, acutely aware of how her simple cotton dress stood out in a sea of silk and tailored suits. The waiter, a tall, severe man named Jean-Pierre, had approached with a practiced, predatory grace. He hadn't greeted her. He'd simply looked at her single place setting, then back at her, a flicker of disdain in his eyes. "Just you?" he'd asked, the question hanging in the air heavy with judgment. The inciting incident. The bisque arrived. It was lukewarm. Maya, normally too shy to complain, felt a small surge of courage. For what she was paying, it should at least be hot. "Excuse me," she said, catching the waiter's eye. "I'm so sorry, but it's a bit cold." Jean-Pierre stopped, his posture stiffening. He didn't look at the soup. He looked at her. He leaned in, his voice a low, conspiratorial hiss, meant only for her, yet sharp enough to cut. "Perhaps," he murmured, "Mademoiselle's palate is simply unaccustomed to the subtle complexities of a true French bisque." His lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It is not meant to be hot. It is meant to be appreciated." The condescension was a slap in the face. Humiliation, hot and swift, washed over her. Nearby diners glanced over, their curiosity piqued by the tense exchange. Maya's courage evaporated instantly, replaced by a familiar, sinking feeling of wanting to be invisible. "No, you're right. I'm sorry," she stammered, her eyes dropping to the table. And that's when the first tear escaped. A silent, traitorous drop that landed right next to her spoon. Rising tension. The waiter, Jean-Pierre, seemed to take a cruel pleasure in her distress. He glided past her table several times, a smug little smirk playing on his lips each time he saw her huddled in the booth, trying to make herself smaller. He refilled the water glasses at the tables on either side of her, pointedly ignoring her empty one. The final indignity came when he placed the bill on her table with a loud, deliberate tap. She hadn't asked for it. Her champagne glass was still half full. "So you can settle up whenever you are ready," he said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "We will need the table shortly." The unspoken message was clear. "You don't belong here. Pay up and get out." Maya's hands trembled as she reached for her wallet. She felt the stares of the other patrons, a mixture of pity and annoyance. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her quiet grief turned into a public spectacle. The magnificent dreamlike restaurant had become her own personal prison. The entrance. The low hum of polite conversation, the gentle melody of a string quartet in the corner, it all continued, a world indifferent to Maya's silent breakdown. Then the heavy oak door opened, chiming softly. It wasn't a loud sound, but it cut through the room's ambiance with an odd finality. A ripple of whispers started near the entrance. Heads turned. Forks paused halfway to mouths. A different kind of silence began to spread, one of awe, not awkwardness. Into that space stepped Steven Seagal. He was an unmistakable presence, dressed in his signature black, moving with a deliberate, grounded economy that seemed to absorb the room's anxious energy. He stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the restaurant, a predator assessing his territory. His eyes, dark and piercing, passed over the opulent decor and the well-heeled clientele, missing nothing. And then, they stopped. They locked onto the smallest, quietest, most heartbreaking detail in the entire room. A young woman backed into a corner booth, crying silently into her hands. The confrontation. Maya was so lost in her misery, she didn't notice the shift in the room until a large shadow fell over her table. She looked up, startled, into the calm, unreadable face of Steven Seagal. He didn't say a word to her at first. He simply stood there, his presence an immovable object. The waiter, Jean-Pierre, scurried over, his professional disdain instantly replaced by fawning sycophancy. "Mr. Seagal, what an honor! A table for you, sir. Right this way. Our best one." He gestured toward a plush, secluded booth across the room. Seagal didn't even glance at him. His focus was entirely on Maya. He pulled a chair from an adjacent table, turned it around and sat, his arms resting on the back. He was now at her level. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. Jean-Pierre let out a nervous chuckle. "The young lady is just a bit overwhelmed, sir. Nothing to concern yourself with." Seagal's eyes slowly moved from Maya to the waiter. The look was not angry. It was worse. It was chillingly calm. "She looks upset," he stated, not as a question but as a fact. "Why is she upset?" The turning point. I am not sure, sir," the waiter stammered, his composure beginning to crack under the weight of that unwavering gaze. "Perhaps the restaurant is not to her liking." Seagal looked back at Maya. "Is that true?" he asked gently. "Is the restaurant not to your liking?" Maya shook her head, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. He was just so rude to me," she whispered, her voice cracking. The manager, a slender man in a tailored suit, now hurried over, sensing a far greater problem than a dissatisfied customer. "Mr. Seagal, is there an issue? I am the manager. Perhaps I can help." Seagal held up a hand, a simple, quiet gesture that stopped the manager in his tracks. "We're having a conversation," he said, his voice still low, but now with an edge of steel. He turned his full attention back to Jean-Pierre. "She says you were rude to her. Explain." The waiter swallowed hard, his face paling. "Sir, with all due respect, she's a bit sensitive. She complained about the bisque." A profound waiting silence fell over the immediate area. "The bisque," Seagal repeated flatly. "And what did you do?" "I merely explained the culinary integrity of the dish," Jean-Pierre insisted, his voice rising in panic. "And I brought her the check because she seemed finished. Our policy for solo diners on a busy night is—" Seagal leaned forward, cutting him off. His voice dropped even lower, becoming a terrifyingly calm murmur. "Policy," he said, the word dripping with contempt. "You saw a young woman alone, and you decided she wasn't worth your time. You decided she wasn't worth your respect. You embarrassed her. You made her cry. That's not policy. That's cruelty. The manager took a step forward, wringing his hands. Sir, please. This is highly... Seagal's eyes flicked to him. This is highly necessary, he interrupted. He then looked back at the now trembling waiter. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every person at the surrounding tables lean in. You know, I have a policy too, Seagal said, his voice dangerously soft. It's about not tolerating disrespect, especially when it's directed at my family. He held the waiter's gaze for one more beat, then looked softly at Maya. Isn't that right, honey? The word hung in the air. Honey. The waiter's jaw went slack. The manager froze. In the space of a single heartbeat, the entire story had changed. This wasn't a celebrity defending a stranger. This was a father. The falling action. A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. Jean-Pierre looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of pure horror. Your daughter? He stammered, his voice barely a squeak. Seagal ignored him completely, his attention solely on Maya. What do you want to do? He asked her gently, giving the power back to her. She looked from her father's steady, protective gaze to the pathetic, crumbling waiter. The shame and fear she'd felt moments ago were gone, replaced by a quiet, steadying anger. I just want to go, she said, her voice clear and firm for the first time all night. Seagal nodded slowly. He stood up, turning to the petrified manager. Her meal is, of course, complimentary, he stated, but that's not enough. You're going to apologize to her for what your staff did. And he, Seagal said, gesturing to Jean-Pierre with a slight nod of his head, is going to be dealt with. The manager, stammering profusely, assured them the waiter would be dismissed immediately. Seagal simply looked at him. See that he is? The aftermath. They walked toward the exit, a path clearing before them as if by magic. Patrons who had watched the drama unfold now looked away, a new level of respect in their silence. At the door, Seagal paused and turned back to the manager. One more thing, he said. Send a bottle of your best champagne to every table that had to witness that disgraceful performance. Put it on my bill. It was a final, undeniable statement of class. Outside, the cool night air felt like a balm. The valet, practically tripping over himself, brought Seagal's car around. Before they got in, he put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. His expression softened, the hard edges melting away, leaving only a father's concern. I'm sorry I was late, he said, his voice full of a quiet warmth she hadn't heard all night. Maya leaned her head against his shoulder, a real smile finally breaking through. You weren't late, she replied, her voice full of relief. You were right on time. Reflection. As they drove away, leaving the glittering lights and quiet shame of Le Rêve behind, the power dynamic of the evening settled into its final form. A hero hadn't saved a damsel in distress. A father had stood up for his daughter. He hadn't thrown a punch or raised his voice. He had won the battle with something far more powerful, a quiet, unshakable presence and the simple, devastating truth. He hadn't rescued her. He had reminded her of her own value, reflecting a strength back at her that she had forgotten she possessed. He showed her, and an entire restaurant full of people, that true power isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about having a voice that is so respected, it doesn't need to be raised. And sometimes, it's about simply showing up for the people you love. We've all had moments where we felt small, overlooked, or disrespected, wishing someone would step in and stand up for us. Maya's story reminds us that sometimes they do. It's a powerful reminder that dignity is not a privilege to be earned, but a right to be defended. If this story of quiet strength and a father's love resonated with you, hit that like button. Share a comment below about a time you stood up for someone. or someone stood up for you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove that the strongest heroes are often the ones who speak the most softly.